Welcome to Defeat Your Cravings, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston, Ph.D. Glenn has held his doctorate in psychology for more than 30 years and is also a former multi-million-dollar consultant to the big food industry and uses his experience to help you defeat your cravings. This show will help you to focus on dramatically reducing cravings and leave the diet mentality behind, so you can more easily and effortlessly achieve your health, fitness, and body composition goals. Please remember, no doctor-patient relationship is created via this show, and you are responsible for confirming any changes to your diet, health, or psychological routines with an appropriately licensed professional before implementing them. Now, before we get started, if you haven't yet downloaded the free smartphone app to access dozens of these recordings all in one place, as well as to avail yourself of a confidential community for support, motivation, and assistance, please visit the podcast link on defeatyourcravings.com as soon as possible. And now, here's your host, Dr. Glenn Livingston.
Hey, it's the very good Dr. Glenn Livingston with defeatyourcravings.com. Who am I here with?
This is Howie Jacobson from Ask Howie and Plant Yourself.
Good to see you, buddy.
You too.
I've been doing these quotes of the week with my audience lately in my programs. I thought I'd run some of them by you to just try to get a different perspective. And this is an interesting one because this one comes from our marketing days, and I've been applying it to helping people to eat better, specifically to help them tweak their food plans. And the quote is that big doors swing on small hinges.
Mm-hmm.
You've heard that before?
Yeah, from the marketing days.
Yeah, it's from Dan Kennedy.
I don't remember why.
Well, it's really well known in direct response marketing that small changes to a sales funnel or sales letter or sales process could result in big changes to results.
Okay,
And
sure.
I'm sorry?
Yeah. I was making noises of affirmation.
Go ahead and make those noises.
As I was trained to do as a coach.
Go ahead and make those noises.
Oh,
I wish people would do that every time they agreed with me.
Preach it.
Okay, everybody listening.
Remember that song at the beginning of Ferris Bueller's Day Off where it goes like, oh yeah.
Oh yeah, I love that. Oh yeah. Yeah, I think everybody should do that when they agree with us. Okay, well here's an extreme example that Dan Kennedy reported. He said that he tested a piece for the Columbia Record Club. I think I'm quoting this correctly. We're changing just one letter in the headline, almost doubled response. This is like 30 years ago. The original headline was, "Put music back in your life." Can you guess what one letter he changed that almost doubled response?
I'm sure it wasn't changing put to puss, but actually I remember this one.
Oh, you do?
Yes, it was turning it to puts to make it
Right.
passive so you don't have to do anything.
Right.
Yeah, I remember that. Wow.
Put implied that the reader had to do some work to get the benefit, but puts said the record club was going to do it for you. There was a tremendous change in the results because of that, because that very small change represented a real paradigmatic shift. In Defeat Your Cravings, we find similarly that small tweaks to your food plan can create big changes in results. These are often, but not always, in the form of what we call conditional rules. A conditional rule is where you don't give up something entirely. You have very specific conditions in which you can have it. And so here are some examples of rules that work like that. My old rule was that I'll never again eat nuts or seeds. I was getting carried away eating nuts by the handful. This is a long time ago. And eventually I said, well, there are healthy things about nuts and seeds. I had heard some studies about them preventing arrhythmias, particularly raw seeds, about them actually helping with weight loss if you kept them in a reasonable amount. And that they had, omega-3s, and there were actually some very healthy, valuable things about them. And I didn't want to eliminate them entirely just because I was getting carried away with them. So I tweaked the rule, and instead of I'll never again eat nuts or seeds, I said I'll never again eat nuts or seeds by themselves, which meant I could have them in salad dressings or sauces, but never just by the handful. You see what I'm saying?
Yep. I mean,
Keep them coming, buddy.
Just to respond to that one, is like, what I like about that particularly is it involved creativity. You had to create in your mind a category that didn't necessarily exist in your mind beforehand or exist in the outside world for you to be able to say, okay, so you could list 1,000,001 conditions, or you could create a distinction a higher level distinction that then everything would fit into, and then your lawyer brain could assess whether there were likely loopholes. Right. So I don't think I would have thought of that. Like I would have been like, well, could I have them like in trail mix, but just like, oh, by themselves as opposed to as an ingredient. I find that very helpful and creative.
I have to admit, I didn't come up with that alone. I was actually working with a client. This is like the first 6 months that my first book was on the market, which is almost a decade ago now. It's crazy. She was struggling with something similar, and we came up with that for her. And I said, oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Which happens with the clients sometimes. It's a good idea.
It's a good reason for people to get involved in your community. Like stealing other people's good ideas will like get you in trouble if you're an author. But if you're trying to manage your eating, it's a pretty darn smart tactic.
Oh, yeah. I do find that autonomous creativity with your own food plan is an essential ingredient to recovery, meaning that people really need to choose their own food rules rather than have them dictated to them. But you can get input. Creativity thrives on input and resources that you can borrow from to stimulate your ideas. So I don't feel guilty at all about having brainstormed that with a client. I just wanted to give her credit. I forgot her name, though.
So much for that.
so much for that.
I'd give you credit if I could remember who you were. If she's out there listening, maybe she'll contact you and say, that was me.
It was in 2015. I know that much. It would be on one of the old podcasts from 2015. Another rule from one of my coaches was, I'll never again eat after 7 o'clock. But she was feeling guilty because she was breaking it when she was going out to dinner or she was on vacation, which was not all that often. So she asked herself, would it really interfere with my health and fitness goals if I allowed myself to eat after 7 on the rare occasion that I went out to dinner or I was on vacation? And the answer to that was a resounding no. And so then suddenly she had no reason to feel guilty. And that worked out really well for her.
Nice.
Another one of my coaches said, I only eat 3 meals per calendar day with nothing in between. And that was working okay. But what really made it work for her, what really made it stick, was when she said every meal has to include at least 1 serving of raw vegetables. Because it made the meals more satisfying, made her a little less nudgy for snacks in between. And over time, the vegetables started to crowd out some of the other stuff on her plate.
Gotcha. You know where I thought you were going with that one?
Where?
I thought you were going like, but she's an astronaut and she's in the International Space Station and she circles the Earth every 45 minutes. And
well, as a matter of fact, she is an astronaut. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
She'll think that was funny. I wonder, do the astronauts have snacks in between their meals? Do you know?
I don't know.
I don't know.
I know that it's good if they don't get motion sickness because it's very hard to clean up vomit in zero gravity and it can damage electronics.
That would be awful. That would be awful to throw up in
You know where
gravity.
I read that? I was reading Peter Levine's autobiography, the trauma specialist. And he did some work with NASA where he's trying to help the astronauts like not get sick at the beginning of the flight.
Oh, no.
I'm full of useless asides today.
Very useful information today. Could we talk about Globigerian ooze? Do you know anything about Globigerian ooze?
I've never heard of it.
Some kind of seaweed at the bottom of the ocean or algae at the bottom of the ocean in the Atlantic, I think.
I'm going to have to get the spelling because I'm looking that sucker up as soon as we're done.
Okay. Anyway, the point is that you might just be one tweak away from a higher level of success because big doors swing on small hinges. I'd like to bring in another element from my marketing days that have been helpful in helping people evolve their food plans to something that creatively works for them. Is that okay, Howie? Can we keep going?
Yeah.
Back in the days when what I mostly did was develop sales processes and test and tweak them and optimize them, we had a philosophy of testing called beat your control. There's some problems with this because you have to have enough traffic and you have to kind of really understand statistics and stuff. But essentially, when you would be developing a sales process, you wouldn't have just one. Like if there was an opt-in page, you'd have at least 2, and you'd be testing, varying the headline between them. Sometimes you test the color, sometimes you test the font. Usually it was something bigger than that, like the headline or the offer. One of them would usually do better than the other, and then that one would become your control, quote unquote control. And then you'd come up with a new test to try to beat that control. You'd have a long enough period of time to do the test, make sure it was statistically stable. But in this way, if you kept track of the control and you never threw out the control unless something else statistically beat it, you were assured that it would only get better. It couldn't get worse, right? You would stair step your success little by little, but continually testing and beating your control. It sounds simple, but you wouldn't believe how many people don't do that. And I think you know where I'm going with this. I find that this is the case with rules and food plans too. Before you decide to change your food plan, it's a good idea to keep a copy of it, to make notes about how well it's working and what's not working for it, and then make very careful notes about what you're changing. It's really hard to split test one versus the other because it's you and your life and your eating. But you can apply a similar concept and say, well, does this plan work better than the last one? And in this way, you don't keep a new rule, you don't keep a new food plan unless it actually, quote unquote, statistically beats your previous one. And then you can stair step your response with your food plan also. That was actually a big part of my recovery. I thought of the food plan like a sales letter, where I was trying to convince myself to behave in a certain way, to eat a certain way, look to see what worked better and better and better. And I just applied the same principles and it worked. It only got better. What do you think?
Well, first, what you just said was really interesting. If the food plan is a sales letter to yourself, until that moment, I always thought of the food plan as a plan of action primarily. But you're right, it really is a rhetorical document, right? Designed to motivate you and guide you to act in a certain way. So it really is a sales letter.
Yes.
You could look at the world's best food plan that would get you to your goal and go, nah, not today. I don't feel like it.
Yep. And you can look at your refutations as a sales process also. So, there are things that your inner food monster tells you to try to get you to break the rules.
Common objections.
Right. And then you have refutations, which are answers to the objections. So if, when the pig says just start tomorrow, you'll say, well, it's going to be harder to start tomorrow, not easier, or not just as easy because I'm going to reinforce the craving and the thought about starting tomorrow. Or just one bite won't hurt. You can say, well, it's never a bite. It's never just a bite. I don't get away with anything. And one bite is a tragedy. It's the difference between me being in charge versus my pig or my food monster being in charge. Am I the master or the slave? And these are all self-persuasive arguments. And you can test those also. You can read those every day, or especially before you eat, and see which ones of those are more persuasive and continue to work with those refutations until you find ones that really work for you. So yes, we're in the business of teaching self-persuasion. I have an aside, but I'll let you talk if you want to first because I'm going to switch topics.
Go for it. You sound like you're on a roll.
I used to have this argument with my dad. My dad really didn't like marketing or sales. He said, ooh, I don't want to be an icky used car salesman. Wait a minute, Dad. Ethical marketing is convincing people to do something which is in their best interest using words and maybe feelings and pictures too. Getting people to do something that's in their best interest, which is also in your best interest too, because you get the money. But if you're going to be ethical about it, you're choosing a goal that is really in their best interest. That's ethical marketing. I said, Dad, what is psychotherapy? Aren't you trying to convince people every day to behave more in their best interest? Yes, you're trying to develop their frustration tolerance and their object constancy, which is kind of the ability to maintain a relationship when that person isn't there, and communication skills. But ultimately, those are all things that are in their best interest, and you're trying to influence them with words and feelings and not so much images in psychotherapy. But how is that different than ethical marketing? I had this tremendous insight because up until that point, I felt like there was something wrong with being a salesperson. But at that point, I said, no, Dad, I'm kind of applying psychotherapeutic concepts to the masses, convincing people with words and feelings and images to do what's in their best interest. So that was yet another time when I bridged the gap between sales and marketing and what I'm actually trying to get people to do. That's what I had to say about, I guess we're talking today about professional marketing concepts that can really influence your ability to influence yourself. Thoughts?
Yeah, so I have some thoughts, not as a marketing guy, but as an implementation guy. So, a lot of what I do is help people move forward, startup founders or CEOs or heads of divisions who have a project they want to get done or a state they want their domain to achieve. And they're all really smart. And one of the things that smart people are good at is abstraction. But the mind that's actually going to get things done isn't so good at abstraction. It's good at specifics. That's why your food rules are highly specific and visual, as opposed to things like don't overeat or eat mindfully. Like that ain't going to help. No, like the part of your mind that is actually going to be carrying things out on autopilot doesn't know what the hell mindfully is,
Right.
but it
Right.
knows put my fork down between bites. Like it can see that. And so when I work with people on creating the plans, let's say it's complex, it's multi-step, and you're probably going to have to pivot many times along the way or tweak because things are going to come up. So just the way you're building that into your food plan is like, I know I'm going to be trying out various things. I'm going to be split testing. So as you said, with Google clicks or impressions and clicks, if you have a statistician friend or you want to look it up or learn it, you could know like, okay, how many impressions do I need to get? How many clicks? Like what would constitute a win as opposed to noise? And but people are very resistant to doing that around things that are more amorphous, that aren't that mathematically clear. So I think one of the things that I would recommend for people is if you say, okay, so I've got these two rules. I've got the one I'm following now, and I have a hypothetical challenger that might be better, is to figure out in advance what's going to trigger the decision. Like if people are running the Indy 500 race, you know what the finish line is. If you're going to run a 10K, you know what the finish line is. So define the finish line in advance so that you don't go, oh, I like this rule better because it lets me have more chocolate.
Right.
Right. This is the winner. This feels good. But really just determine what victory looks like and how I'm going to call it.
So I'm going to do a 30-day experiment where I eat no sugar or flour, and I'm going to decide how well this works for me based upon the change in my digestion, my weight, and my energy level.
Beautiful.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah. So something whereby like you could keep on running an experiment forever. Like when I was doing marketing consulting, I had people who would run split tests and never pay attention to them. And then we'd go into their account and look and like, oh, this one, you've lost $12,000 by not changing the control.
Yes. Once you know you have a winner, you don't want to keep the loser running.
Yeah. I've also had clients who didn't understand this at all, and if every day they would pick the winner for that day, even if it only got like 12 impressions and 2 clicks, they basically split tested themselves into bankruptcy because they hadn't saved anything. They were just following noise rather than meaningful signal.
Which is why you always want to save a dated copy of your food plan when you make a change.
Yes. I mean, it's so easy to save bits. They don't cost me anything.
They don't? Why are they charging me for bits then? I'm just kidding. Ideally, if I were going to take this concept to the max, I would say you should really measure your energy level, your weight, your digestion in some type of a quantitative scale. You can look up scales online to kind of anchor your energy level on a scale from 1 to 10, and weight is fairly easy, but you can measure those kind of things more quantitatively and objectively. What I find as a practical matter is that it's really clear after a month that some of these changes make such a big difference that you don't really need those quantitative measurements. But if you really want to convince yourself before you start the experiment, take those tests, write down the numbers. And I write it down every week in between, and you'll see.
Yeah, a lot of like new age or naturopathic or alternative complementary health people will have you do that because they're not so into standard medical testing, blood test or this or that, in order to sort of help the client see their progress and also sell them on the fact that this is working. They might give them a scale on a scale of 1 to 5, from never to frequently. Do you lose your temper? Do you feel depressed? Do you get anxious? And they'll have you fill that out like once a month when you come in. And then like you don't remember what you felt like in September, but then you have all this data in front of you. And look, your average here was 2.1 and your average here is now 4.3. Like, look at this progress. It's so incremental, you don't notice. It's like noticing yourself getting old by looking yourself in the mirror every day. If I look at a snapshot of myself from 10 years ago, I'm like, holy cow, life has done a number.
I was actually looking at pictures of me when I was 9 years old with a woman that I was dating, and we both said, this doesn't look like me at all. If I showed you pictures of me when I was 9, you just would not recognize me at all. But I think part of that is because I have a beard. I didn't have a beard back.
Yeah, I was going to say you weren't 6'5" with a beard then, I'm guessing.
I took my beard off once since I got divorced, and I just don't recognize that guy. I've had a beard most of my life. People said I was really handsome and everything, and actually so much so that I've thought about keeping it off, but I don't recognize the guy who looks like a turtle to me. Why am I talking about this? I don't know. How do we get to hairless faces and turtles? I don't get the idea.
I believe it was about the incremental nature of change and how hard it is to notice change unless we take snapshots.
That's true. There's one more lesson you could take from all of this on a more meta level, which is to ask yourself how you could build on your principles of success. Part of what went into my development of Defeat Your Cravings was my previous success in marketing. And there were a number of principles and techniques that I learned there that I ported to an area where most people wouldn't normally experiment with it. One thing you can do is ask yourself, how can you use Glenn's principles and how can you apply this to food yourself? But you could also ask yourself, what made me successful in the past in any endeavor in life, particularly in a non-food endeavor? In your job, in learning a language, in parenting, in sports or exercise, in academics, what made you successful? What 2 or 3 principles did you learn that really worked for you? And ask that question separate and apart from what it has to do with food and really articulate what the answer is. And once you really know, then say, what impact could that have, might that have on how I deal with food? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Whatever you notice grows, right? Whatever you attend to tends to increase. So if you're looking at with curiosity and appreciation at your success formula, whatever it is, and it doesn't have to be grand, right? It can be like, I brush my teeth twice a day. I've been doing that without fail since I was 7.
Yep.
Not everybody can do that.
So I'll give you another example, which I know you'll relate to because you're also a juggler, and maybe you can help me apply this to food. So I spent entirely too much time in my room when I was a kid, and I had what you would call an odd abilities complex. And I taught myself how to juggle 5 balls. I also taught myself how to juggle knives and bowling balls, and my mother wasn't too happy with that, so I stopped doing that. But that's besides the point. And the thing about juggling 5 balls is you really have to study the technique for a while. The book I read about it says that on a scale from 1 to 10, juggling 3 balls is about a 4, juggling 4 balls is about an 11, and juggling 5 balls is about a 37. And I would say that that's accurate. It was a very hard thing to learn. I don't know if you felt like that, but it was a very hard thing to learn.
Yeah, if I ever get it, I'll let you know.
Oh, okay. I don't have it as a permanent skill. I have to practice and kind of meditate with it in order to get back to it. But you got to study the technique for a long time. And then once you have the technique, you have to forget about it. When I would get it, and I'd be standing and juggling balls, and I used to do this every day, I would be doing great until I all of a sudden would look at the balls and say, holy shit, there's 5 balls in the air. I learned that if I couldn't do it, then I had to go back and study the technique. But really, to keep it going, I had to kind of forget about it. I think that it's very similar in developing your own personal food economy with a set of food rules. I think when you're developing your own personal food economy, you need to put the work in the beginning to think through exactly what the rules should be and how are you going to tweak them in the small ways that we're talking about. But then once you really have them and you've gone through the extinction curve and you've been following the rules for a couple of months, you need to pay a little less attention to them. And it just kind of becomes part of who you are and what you do. And this is why I say I don't obsess about a rule that says I'll never have chocolate again. I'm just a person that doesn't have chocolate. You know what I mean? And part of that came from my experience in a previous area of life with my juggling. So
for anything that I do with automaticity, because I've practiced it enough, the one way to make sure I screw up is to have me think about it.
Yes, right.
I'm playing this sport over here called paddle, which is a little like pickleball or like tennis in a very small court with walls that the ball bounces off of. You know, I'm a very good racket sports player. I play squash, tennis, racquetball. It comes in handy, like for hand-eye, but I'm clearly not going to progress in this game if I bring all my habits from these other sports. I'm like a good player, but I'm a mess. I couldn't beat good players because I don't have the technique. So I took a lesson. And now all of a sudden, I can't beat the people that I was beating before because now I'm thinking about the angle of the racket and how far I am from the wall and all this stuff that's going to help me at some point. But making it conscious has totally messed up what I could do.
Yes.
You want to make something conscious when you want to change it.
What I find is that if I have screwed that up, that I have to go, for example, with juggling, if I want to get back to juggling 5 balls, I have to go all the way back to 1 ball first. There's a way that I learned how to juggle where you throw the ball up in an arc that's supposed to pass right over the bridge of your nose, and you need to know exactly when the ball stops going up and starts coming down, because that's when you throw the second ball. So there's this exercise where you throw the ball and you say now when it's passing the arc. I don't know how you were taught. That's what I was taught. And if I screw up and I just can't get the 5 balls or 3 balls or whatever it is, I got to go back to 1 ball. And it only takes like 10 or 20 minutes of doing that. And then I find that I can stop thinking about it and my skills come back. And I've found it to be very similar with food. People often say, I was really good for 4 months. Everything was going great. And then I had 1 bite of sugar, and then I had more bites of sugar. And then before I knew it, I was off the rails, and now it doesn't seem to work, which just means that they're choosing not to follow the rest of the rules. But they'll say that my food plan is crap now. I'll say, well, let's just go back to one simple rule for a couple of days. What's the most important thing you could do that's not too onerous that you could do? You're not going to lose a bunch of weight, this week as you're getting started and getting back into it. But what's one simple thing you could do? And they'll go all the way back to one simple rule for a little while, and then they recover their equilibrium and their grace, and they can suddenly do it again.
Yeah. My favorite genre of movies is sports movies. And I have never seen a sports movie that didn't have, like, as its central theme, the back to basics montage. Right? So you look at like Hoosiers. Gene Hackman is a basketball coach in Indiana. He doesn't even let the players touch the ball until they've spent like weeks just doing footwork on the court. Or, Karate Kid, wax on, wax off.
Right.
And you see that in real life coaching, like the most successful coaches, these hotshot high school kids will come, to play for John Wooden at UCLA. And they'll be like, well, this is boring. We're just doing like passing drills. Like, what about the behind the back, dunk layup? Honoring the fundamentals. And, you're an accomplished musician. At some point, your teacher didn't say, okay, Glenn, you can stop playing scales now.
Exactly. Who's that virtuoso violinist that's like 90 years old and he's always practicing? You can catch him practicing his scales. I forgot his name. Yo-Yo Ma or...
Yo-Yo Ma's a cellist.
Maybe it's the cellist.
He's not 90. Mstislav Rostropovich is the old cellist.
Okay.
I don't know if he's still alive. They all do, right? I can't remember the pianist who said, like, if I don't practice for 1 day, I notice. If I don't practice for 2 days, my family notices. And if I don't practice for 3 days, my audience notices.
No, and I remember Jerry Seinfeld said, if you're not doing it, you don't have it. Like, if you're not doing your routine, you don't have the routine. The end of the story with the cellist or violinist or whoever that famous person was that someone asked him, you've been at this for 60 years. Why are you out here practicing several hours a day? And he said, well, I think I'm finally getting somewhere. So I kind of think of the food plan like that. It's like a sacred practice, or pruning a bonsai tree, or doing yoga. It's about showing up and executing it to the best of your ability and being in harmony with it, and evolving it over time so that it becomes something that's really sacred and a centerpiece in your life. It's where you find your center. It's where you find your soul. It's not just a bunch of rules or like installing a bunch of Nazi food policemen in your mind.
Yeah. And, you mentioned earlier, like, you can use the non-food arenas of your life to find out what works for you here. When you master your food, that becomes another resource for you to draw upon when you're facing other challenges.
100%.
It just becomes generalized. Oh, I can do this. I don't know how many people who get through your programs successfully go, well, that was easy. I think they probably go, that was the biggest challenge I've ever overcome.
Yeah. And they're surprised at how easy the solution was. It's just there's a lot of information that occluded their ability to see that. Well, this turned into a very interesting and fruitful conversation. Thanks, Howie.
I loved it, and I hope people find value in it. Cool.
And that brings us to the end of today's broadcast of Defeat Your Cravings, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston. Now, if you'd like to find out more about the products and services Dr. Glenn offers to help you dramatically reduce your cravings and stop overeating in 90 days or less, please visit defeatyourcravingscoaching.com. That's defeatyourcravingscoaching.com. Thanks.